Andrew, so the name of this live stream was "Don't Touch the Orb," and I don't know why I called it that, but it's because of uh, this tool called OrbStack that I started playing with a couple days ago, and I know you've been playing with it as well. And what is it? What's OrbStack?
When I first saw the title to this craft quest, I thought you were talking about our bald heads. I'm like, what are we doing, Ryan? What's going on?
I'm a little overgrown here.
But you have my screen shared, correct?
Yeah, let me bring that up real quick. There we go. Same
Okay,
same web page, different
right.
people. All right.
Right, but I'm going to show a little bit more. So, OrbStack is something that I heard about a few months ago, but
Hmm.
I was just like, local dev environments. I'm using Docker desktop. Everything's working great. I don't need to mess with anything, whatever. Seems interesting, but I didn't really look at it at the time. And then someone brought it up again in the Craft CMS Discord, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go check this thing out and see exactly what it is. I was a little, I think when I first saw it, I thought it was going to be something similar to Valet, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like this kind of, packaged environment, but it uses homebrew and it installs all this crap on your machine. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't need that. I love the fact that I'm living the doc life
Yeah.
and I don't have to worry about any of this kind of stuff. So I looked into it a little bit more. And yeah, this is the homepage for their, shows off what it is. It's a nice little app. The cool thing about this, I'm going to switch to their documentation and look at the architecture page. I'm just going to go into it briefly. We're not going to nerd out too much about this.
Hmm.
But essentially, if you're using Docker Desktop, you're using Docker, but Docker Desktop is a entirely separate thing. Docker Desktop is essentially a layer that integrates your Mac with Docker,
Right.
right? So you're running just your raw dog in Docker, you're just running Docker, but Docker Desktop is sort of the interface between your machine and Docker running. And there are other things that people run. They can run something called Kolima,
Hmm.
which is an open source replacement for Docker Desktop.
Which
You're
is
still using,
popular for companies because the enterprise pricing for Docker Desktop can be pretty aggressive. A lot of companies won't do it, and so they use
right.
Galima. Yeah.
Yep. Um, and when I learned by looking into the architecture of Orb, and this is what got me from the point of I'm actually going to try this thing, is very similar to both of those things we talked about, Docker Desktop and Kolima. You're still using Docker.
Hmm.
All the same Docker commands work. Like you don't have to worry about any of that. It's replacing the layer that connects your machine to Docker, essentially. And everything else still works. No fuss, no muss, no problems. And I was actually really impressed with it because here's what I did. I usually use Docker Desktop. I didn't bother with Kolima because, I'm using it individually. I don't care. Um, and I've seen people running into some issues with Kolima and all that kind of good stuff. So I was like, you know what? It works. I don't really care. Um, so all I did was I quit Docker Desktop and I downloaded this OrbStack thing. They've got a nice little download link right on their website right here. Click download. And you get a disk image with an app. You drag it into your applications folder and you run it.
Yeah, and
And
it'll
you get
it'll even
something.
migrate your Docker Desktop containers as well. Is what it did on mine. Did it do that for you?
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll ask you. So when you first launch it, it will say, "Hey, do you want to start up from scratch, or do you want to copy over any containers that are left over from Docker Desktop?" I actually opted not to do that, and the reason I opted not to do that is I wanted to see the performance just starting raw, starting
Hmm.
from rebuilding everything. Um, and the cool thing is, like, it just worked. Like, I didn't have to do anything else. I quit
Yeah.
Docker Desktop. I ran OrbStack. Answered a couple of questions or whatever, and everything just works. So I'm going to give an example of that real quick, and then we'll get into a little bit more about it. But basically, the architecture that I was just mentioning before, this is the area that OrbStack does stuff. Right. So, and then it still interfaces with a Linux VM, and Docker is running inside of that, which is the way Docker Desktop works already. So it's something that is a layer on top of Docker, just like Docker Desktop, whether you know it or not, is actually a layer on top of Docker. They're separate things,
Mhm.
totally separate things. And Docker itself is entirely free. It's the Docker Desktop app that is free for non-commercial use, but businesses are supposed to pay for it. I think individuals don't need to pay for it either, but organizations do if they want
Right.
to deploy it. Um, and so you might say, all right, well, why would I bother with this thing, Andrew? It's great that you fired it up and it just worked for me, but who cares? Why am I going to bother doing anything with it? Well, the cool thing about it is that it's fast.
It is very
It's
fast.
significantly faster. And they've got a number of benchmarks that they list on their page. You can see here's one. It's 17 minutes in OrbStack, 45 minutes in Docker Desktop. I realize that sounds extraordinarily long, but understand this is building something from scratch, right?
Yep.
And there's going to be some network latency involved in downloading containers and all that kind of good stuff. And in addition to that, if you're someone that is either using a laptop or concerned about the environment and all that kind of good stuff, it uses significantly less energy to run it as well, which I think is really neat. So I was skeptical, Ryan. I was very skeptical. But after using it, man, like I'm going to show you, this is my devmode.fm project here.
Mhm.
And all you do is you type make dev, and that's it. We're now up and running.
Yeah.
Like that's how quick it's up and running. And everything still works, right? So this is I'm still using localhost 8000, which is what's in my config file. And anyone who's using DDEV, stay tuned because Ryan's going to show using DDEV later. But I want to show a couple of kind of cool things here. So everything just works. The networking is faster. The startup times are faster. The build times from scratch are also faster, but understand that there's network time involved there if it's got to download images from somewhere.
Mhm.
And I also talked with some people who have been using this for longer than I have, and they also said it's far more reliable than Docker Desktop. I'm not going to mention names, but there's someone I was talking to who said that, yeah, I've been using it for the last 3 months. I switched because I don't have to worry about Docker Desktop, freezing on me or having to restart it or whatever. I wasn't running into those problems, but it's nice to hear that he found this solution much more reliable. I'm using it currently just because it's like so far I've run into zero problems with it and it's faster and
Yeah.
everything still works. You don't have to learn any new commands. You don't have to learn any new this, new that,
Yep.
everything just works.
Uh,
Um,
in the chat, Caroline asked if this is a recommendation over instead of DDEV. And the cool part about this is that it's just the layer below DDEV. So you keep using DDEV, but you're just using this instead of Docker Desktop. So that's actually what I like about it so much. Is I don't have to I didn't have to retool anything. You don't have to retool anything. I um I pulled up my CraftQuest project, Andrew, which is also using your make setup with Vite, very
mhm.
similar to the dev mode. Um, and I noticed it's fast to start up, but was also way faster were the page loads. There's always like
Yeah.
locally that you get a little bit of a flash of unstyled content.
Yep.
But it's like way faster.
And
And
I think that's a combination of their networking stack, which is
yeah,
supposed to be more efficient, and it uses all the modern stuff. So it's using Rosetta if you have to run anything emulated.
yep,
It also is it's using VirtuoFS, which is a built-in file system, which is way quicker for synchronizing files and stuff. The more files that you're using in your project, and projects like Craft that have a big vendor directory, you've got a ton of files, right? And especially also if you have node modules and all that kind of good stuff, it gets faster the more of that type of thing that you're doing. So it's actually a perfect fit for Craft.
yeah,
Um,
I agree. And they just yesterday, no, today, Andrew, they just released version 1.0. So it's kind of funny that we're
nice.
covering it today.
Which I
Um,
don't think I'm running actually. I don't think
no,
I
I'm not.
updated.
I'm not running because I just got prompted to update. So
But
they are
Caroline is
running.
asking, what is the decoupling process from Docker Desktop? So it's literally what I just said.
Just quit
You
it.
quit Docker Desktop
That's it.
and remove it from your login items so it doesn't start up automatically at
Yeah.
startup time, right? and then you launch OrbStack.
Yeah.
That's
So,
that's it.
yeah.
That's your migration process.
So if you're in, can I do the DDEV part, or you wanna keep going with?
Not yet.
Okay,
Not
go ahead.
yet. And this ties into the question was asked, like, is this something to use instead of DDEV,
Mhm.
right? And as you mentioned, like, no, if you're comfortable with DDEV and you like using it, there's no reason why you can't just use it, right? There's no reason at all. But I do want to show you something that I think makes it kind of cool. That you may say, well, I don't know if you are somewhat familiar with Docker. One of the main reasons, or one of the big advantages to using something like DDEV, is domain routing, right? So you don't have to have everything running off of some kind of random port or whatever. You don't have to stop a project and then spin up a new project.
Right.
DDEV provides that, right? Where you can give each project, you can give it its own local domain, and it can be, foobar.local or whatever, or .ddev or whatever you want it to be, right? So one of the cool things about that is built into OrbStack is that every container gets its own custom name.
Right.
So you can see here, it says it's going to name it service.project.orb.local, right? So by virtue of the fact, so I showed this before, where I've got my project up and running, and it's running localhost 8000, which is what I've got it configured to do, right? But also, you can see here, I've got nginx.devmode.orb.local, right?
Mhm.
So it also loads from here, but hold on a minute. Something's kind of not working right because we don't have our icons are not showing up and things look a little bit funky
Yeah.
compared to this, right? You see that, right?
Yep.
But the cool thing is this also works with any other service. So to access your database, it would be database.project.orb.local. Like that all just magically works out of the box. So every project can have its separate domain name. But let's take a look real quick and let's see. All right, we got this thing and it's running off of this custom domain, which is kind of cool, but there's an error. So let's take a look at what the error is. Okay, so can't access the font. Okay, so it's a CORS error, right?
Mhm.
So it's trying to get something from localhost, and the origin is actually now here because that's what I've entered in here. Well, there's a real simple fix for this. So this is now our domain. So I'm copying that. And all we have to do is go to our .env file. And this is where I've got environment variables for the host name. And forgive me, guys, I'm working with one hand, so it may not be the best. It's a little painful trying to select this. There we go. All right. So now what I've done is I've changed in my local.env, I've just changed it to be nginx orb.local, right? And then if I reload the page now, oh, there we go. Everything's there. The CORS error is gone. Everything just works, right? So all that is changing your .env to match, whatever domain name you're using in your browser.
Yep.
And I think it's really cool that they provide all of these, it gives examples here, like if you've got a container named API, you access it via api.projectname.orb.local, and that all just works. So it's really cool that zero conf out of the box, you've got domain names working. You don't have to
Yeah.
name anything. Like
Right.
it just works. But
If you wanna configure it even more for the domain,
yeah,
that's actually really straightforward.
yeah, and I'm going to show that too, right? So let's say really what I want to do is I want to access this thing from devmode.local. Everything's got to end in .local,
Yep.
right? So that's actually super easy to do. And the same thing works inside of DDEV if you still want to use DDEV for other reasons. But in this case, we're going to go to the Docker Compose, and all you do is you add a label. So this is our nginx container. You add a label, and you say dev.orbstack.domains equals devmode.local,
Yep.
right? So we're saying, really, we want this any network traffic to this container to be routed through this domain. And then we just have to do the same thing we did before to get our fonts loading. We have to say, you know what? We want it to be this. right? And then we go back over here, and then we shift reload, and then dev mode.local is now working again with all the fonts and the icons and all that kind of stuff showing. So the reason I'm showing you this is it's cool that it does this automatic naming stuff. That is one reason why a lot of people choose to use something like DDEV is they
Yeah.
want to be able to name their projects. This does it for you. So now the reason, like, you don't have to set up some really complicated traffic routing. Traffic is a Docker pack, or it's a network routing package, but a lot of people use it with Docker to provide domain names like this, or domain name routing like this.
Right.
You don't have to set up anything complicated like that. You can just use Docker directly and get your domain names for free. Like, it's just going to work, which
Yeah.
I think is really cool. And the only change you're going to need to make is, just add it to your config file and change the any environment variables as necessary, and it all just works. So the long way of saying you could replace DDEV with this if you feel comfortable just using a Docker Compose file.
Yeah. So, and what I did is, I I did the same thing, right? On This is my CraftQuest project. I just added craftquest.local because up to
Yep.
this point it's just been localhost 8,000 or 8080. I can't remember which 8,000. I see right here. Um, and I just ran make dev, and it just worked. It was a zero effort migration from using Docker Desktop to using OrbStack, uh, and it's the same thing with DDEV. There were some questions in the chat. If you shut down Docker Desktop and you launch OrbStack and you go into one of your projects and you just run DDEV start, um, it will look for Docker, Docker on your machine, and it'll just start building those containers. There shouldn't be any other work beyond that, and that's
Yeah.
it.
It's just going to work,
It's
which
just gonna
is
work.
really cool. So
Now, I don't
if you
use.
do,
Sorry, I haven't set up the since Docker since DDEV already offers custom host names per project. I didn't set any of that up because I already have it working with. I mean,
and
you
that
have.
continues to just work,
It
right?
just works, yeah. So
Yeah.
there's my, this is my domain here, and oops, and it just works just fine. There's nothing that I need to do about it. That's opening in another window. Unfortunately, oh, it's actually opening in Safari, Andrew. Look at that.
How about that? Like, someone who doesn't use it for development, it sure is your default browser,
It
right?
is the default browser because I like to read stuff in it. But yeah, so that's running in OrbStack, and you can see it right here. And that's it. It creates all those stacks of or groups of different containers that you need. So here's
Yep.
the
And that
DDEV.
little
This is
link icon next to each container is
Yep,
a web browsable link.
yep,
Yep.
exactly. So
And you can
really,
right click to copy it. So if you want to connect to the database, you can just right click, copy the database container thing, paste it in, boom, away you go.
yeah. Uh, Again, a really nice UI gives you all the information you need about what's going on. Pretty great. Right now, this is still free. They just released 1.0, but I assume they're going to at some point charge for this. I think
Okay.
that's what I
So
read.
that's the other thing. Switch back to my screen.
All right.
um, so that's the other thing that you might want to know about, right? Is OrbStack free? So for personal use, it's free. This is what they're planning to do, right? So, and we want to tell everyone this up front to let you know, we don't want to get you hooked on this and then think that, it's going to be completely free. For business or commercial use, it's $8 per user per month. Um, I personally, and I want to emphasize something that you said earlier. It is zero config to get it up and running, just if you're using Docker on its own or if you're using DDEV. Like, literally, you have to change nothing. You
Right.
quit Docker Desktop, you launch OrbStack, it runs, everything works, except it's faster. Right?
It's a lot faster.
Um, it's significantly faster, which is really nice. I would pay for that. I would pay for
Yeah.
that. Me personally, I would pay $8 a month, but we want to let you know that this is something that for business and commercial use, they're planning on charging for it eventually. So if that affects your decision, okay,
Don't use it.
that's fine.
Yeah.
But you can try this out just by doing what we said. And if you don't like it, you just quit it and you launch Docker Desktop or Kolima and you go back to what you're doing and everything's just going to work. It's not going to mess anything up
Yep.
because of the layered way that Docker works.
And it's available for Intel, Apple Silicon, and I think on the Intel side, so if someone's still, rocking an Intel laptop, which there are tons of people, this actually might be a little bit nicer on battery life and performance
Way
than
better.
you will get with Docker Desktop. So even there, like $8 a month to extend the life of your laptop could be well worth it. So definitely check it out. Roger says OrbStack Mac only. It is Mac only. It is a Mac only tool.
But I want to emphasize that it is not like some of the other tools that are out there. There's Valet, and what's the name of the new Laravel app that they came out with? Do you remember the name of that?
Mm, I don't.
Laravel no longer has Valet as part of the ecosystem. They replaced it with something else that I forget the name of. Those two both work in a way
Oh,
where
Sail?
they're
No, Sail is Docker based.
no, Sail is Docker based.
I
Those
use
two
Sail
work in a
right
way
now,
where
which is nice.
they're installing stuff on your actual computer. This still uses a Dockerized setup where everything is very layered, and you're going to get all of the benefits of Docker with significantly faster speed and less battery usage than is in Docker Desktop. And for me, that's a no brainer.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree.